Welcome everyone. This is Hannah Burton-Lorison, and we're really glad that you could join us today for this webinar, Green for Greens. This is probably one of the most common questions I'm asked about corner store work. How do I fund this work in a way that's sustainable and that ensures the greatest possible outcomes? So we've put together this webinar today to give you an overview of the various funding sources that are available to support your work and some thoughts on how to really deepen the impact you have in small stores. This webinar is the second in a three-part series we're calling New Carrots on the Block. Our third and final webinar is coming up on August 27th, and will cover how you can provide incentives to small business owners through Healthy Corner Store certification programs. If you didn't join us last Monday, July 23rd, you can watch a recording of our earlier webinar on cultivating relationships with local policymakers on our website, which is changelabsolutions.org. So here's what we'll cover today. We're going to start with an overview of the resources to support Healthy Corner Stores. And then we'll hear from Anthony Taylor, who is with the Sonoma County Department of Health Services. And he and his colleagues have been really effective at leveraging some unusual funding sources. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say today. Then we'll hear some concrete tips on developing a funding plan and pitching that funding plan for your Healthy Corner Store project. And then we're very pleased to be joined by Veronica Saldana from the California Freshworks Fund. And she'll describe how Freshworks is supporting the development of healthy food retail in underserved communities throughout California. Today's webinar is being brought to you by Change Lab Solutions, formerly known as Public Health Law and Policy. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we work to create innovative law and policy solutions to transform neighborhoods. And my colleagues and I are available to support your Healthy Corner Store work by sharing lessons learned from other communities, by connecting you with technical expertise, and really highlighting how policy can enhance the sustainability and impact of your work over the long term. Today's webinar is being sponsored by the Network for a Healthy California. And the staff of the retail program at the network have a number of fantastic tools, different resources, and outreach activities to support healthy changes in the retail environment. And we're really thrilled to have them as partners on this work. And just so you can put a face with my voice, that's me, Hannah. I'm a planner here at Change Lab Solutions and one of the co-conveners of the National Healthy Corner Stores Network, which is a fantastic resource for this work that we'll talk about in a little bit. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lisa Chen, another one of the planners here at Change Lab Solutions. And Lisa and I support a number of different approaches to increasing access to healthy, affordable food where it's needed most, both here in California and across the country. And as I said, we're thrilled to be joined by Anthony Taylor, who is the manager of the Chronic Disease Prevention Program at Sonoma County Department of Health Services, and Veronica Saldana, who's the Business Development Manager with the California Freshworks Fund. So you will be able to communicate with the four of us on the webinar today using the chat function, which if you look is in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And let's just warm up the chat box. I'm curious to know, I always love hearing the names of corner stores because I think they just say so much about what's going on inside the corner store. So if you have a store that you're working with, I'd love to hear the name of the store. If you could enter that in the chat box, it would be great to know the name of your store. So I'm going to hand the baton over to Lisa in just a moment. We're seeing some really fun names coming in. Oh, Green Apple, I love it. Homegrown Market, the Corner Store, Downtown Market. You all are working with some very literally named stores. Where I live in Oakland, most of the stores have the word liquor in their name, which I think says a lot about how they're choosing to communicate what it is that they sell. So Lisa, will you give us an overview of the resources that are available to support Healthy Corner Stores?
Sure. Thank you, Hannah, for that introduction. So I'm guessing that we have many participants on the call who have experience searching and applying for funding to support public health and nutrition education programs outside of the corner store environment. And that's a really great foundation for today's discussion. Many of the principles of successful fundraising are going to be similar when trying to work in the food retail environment, even if the vocabulary and types of support that you're seeking are different. So today we just want to arm you with a basic understanding of some of this terminology and some of the types of support that are out there so you can start planning for your own fundraising strategy. First of all, here's just a brief snapshot of some of the key institutions and organizations who you may want to recruit to support your Healthy Corner Store efforts. Perhaps you're already working with several of these stakeholders. This list of public, private, and community-based organizations is not inclusive. There may be other organizations and individuals that can provide support, whether in the form of actual financial contributions like grants and loans, or donations of in-kind goods and services. Before we get into what the actual funding sources are that are available, we just wanted to emphasize that our starting assumption here is that the ultimate goal is to cultivate healthy corner stores that are also successful, financially viable corner stores. In our experience, this is probably the only way that any changes to corner stores will be sustained over the long run after the life of Healthy Corner Store projects. So ideally, when you're designing your own Healthy Corner Store initiatives, you'll be able to take time to really understand the store owner's perspectives, assess what his or her needs are, and determine what resources can help them make the shift from business as usual to a new healthy business model. Hannah and I will be introducing just a few of these resources that may be helpful for your local stores. So creating healthy corner stores that are seen as partners who are serving a community need can start outside of the store environment altogether. So starting at the level of the neighborhood, planning and economic development resources can help ensure that the environment around stores is supportive of a safe, walkable, and comfortable shopping experience. So for example, commercial corridor programs and business improvement districts can be used to introduce improvements to the store or improvements to the neighborhood that benefit all business owners. Examples could include streetscape improvements for purposes of walkability, lighting, safety, and cleanliness, or publicity materials that are promoting neighborhood shops. Other helpful organizations might include planning and transportation agencies, business associations, Main Street associations, community development corporations, and neighborhood development corporations.
So moving from resources that support overall neighborhood revitalization, I wanted to highlight resources that support making improvements directly to the exterior of the store. And I want to acknowledge that it might seem a little counterintuitive to talk about changing the outside of the store when we're really concerned about what goes on inside. But I wanted to suggest that facade improvements are really a powerful tool for communicating to the store's customers what they can expect when they go inside. I would imagine that many of you are working with small stores where the windows are covered with alcohol and tobacco advertisements and where the buildings might not be in recent upkeep. And I think it's important to keep in mind that most of your local governments offer support to small businesses wanting to upgrade their exteriors by removing bars, installing lighting, new awnings, planters, etc. And these programs are often funded through the Community Development Block Grant Program. It varies from community to community how these programs are structured. Sometimes they are a loan. But in other communities, they are offered as grants or sometimes as a forgivable loan when certain conditions are met. And I would really encourage you to think about looking at both the neighborhood level changes and the store exterior changes as part of your planning for what goes on inside the store.
So now stepping into the store environment, poor store design can often be one of the biggest barriers that many store owners face to selling healthier foods. Some stores may lack the refrigeration equipment needed to sell fresh produce. This is very common in small stores. And they might have an overall just inefficient or unappealing store layout, which wastes valuable space that could be devoted to healthier products and makes the experience of shopping less pleasant, all of which can have an impact on profits. So your city's economic development office or other local agencies, lenders, and nonprofit organizations may have microloan programs that may be able to give small loans to store owners to improve their stores. A small loan of, say, $5,000 to $15,000 could go a long way in updating the store and enabling it to stock healthier products. And of course, before any improvements are made, you may need the expertise of retail consultants or organizations who specialize in store layout and design. One source for referrals to some of these consultants is the Healthy Corner Store Network, which has a list of some people who have specialized in working in the small store environment. And that list is available at www.healthycornerstores.org.
So although it's definitely true that corner stores are not major employers in the way that many programs designed to stimulate job creation and training have in mind, your project may still be eligible for programs intended to support job creation and training. And investing in store owner skills and capacity can really give great returns over the long term as the store owner becomes more skilled in understanding how his or her business model works and how to offer healthy products while maximizing profitability. And I think this is a really important aspect of Healthy Corner Store work to consider. I'm always really interested in hearing from store owners how they came to this work. And so many store owners come from either very different careers before they came, before they started running a small business, perhaps in their country of origin, or came into the work because this was what their family business was and are trained, within the family business, but don't have any formal business training. So programs that support job creation and training can really be an investment in the store owner and can ultimately really maybe prepare them to take on a larger loan to make investments in their business to increase their capacity to carry healthy food. And we're going to hear in more detail in a moment from Anthony Taylor about how he leveraged the Rural Business Enterprise Grant to support his Healthy Corner Store work. But I wanted to highlight that there are other programs to support job creation and training, including SBA loans and micro enterprise funding. For example, the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement has funded a micro loan fund that's given small loans to refugee corner store owners in Seattle seeking to upgrade their business by increasing healthy options. So for example, they've funded investments in commercial kitchens or bringing the store up to code. I mean, again, very small loans that have really been deployed at a very strategic point of impact to change the business model.
So once you have some of these healthier options in place, which is a great milestone in and of itself, there really needs to be a way to promote the changes in the larger community to attract potential shoppers and to communicate the fact that the store is really making an effort to provide a healthier options to the community. So the Network for a Healthy California, one of the funders of today's webinar, is housed within the California Department of Public Health and has an array of promotional materials and simple, nutritious, and culturally appropriate recipes all available on their website. For those of you who are in California, the network also funds nutrition educators around the state who can work with store owners to help put on community events to teach local families about healthy eating and cooking. And since we know we have a lot of people who are from public health and from nutrition education organizations on the call, if you have other resources out there that you want to promote, feel free to type that into the chat function and we can share some of those to everybody.
So clearly, advocacy and education are a critical component of any Healthy Corner Store project. This is, in fact, I think one of the places where public health department staff and staff of community-based organizations can play such a critical role in partnering with small business owners by really engaging community residents both articulating what it is that they like to see in the small store and educating them about how to cook and prepare fresh foods and become effective advocates for other healthy changes. And the Network for Healthy California, obviously here in California, is a fantastic partner in funding many of those kinds of community outreach projects. Another resource at the federal level is the USDA's Community Food Projects Grant, which really seeks to fund projects that have a very, very strong community engagement component and that also build connections with local farmers. Here is a photograph from the Women's Community Revitalization Project in North Philadelphia, where hundreds and hundreds of community residents were engaged in creating a vision for their community food system, which included, among other things, an initiative to engage corner stores in adding fresh, affordable items to their inventory. And this project was supported by the USDA's Community Food Project.
So even if you have a store owner who's ready to sell fresh produce, who has the equipment and the space and is willing to really kind of take on this new line of business, she or he might have difficulties finding a distributor who is willing to sell and deliver produce at small enough quantities. Some communities have tried to solve this problem by organizing store owners so that they can purchase through distributors cooperatively. Mandela Marketplace, a small cooperatively owned grocery store and nonprofit organization in West Oakland, has gone a step further and created their own distribution system. Through its Emerging Markets program, the organization buys produce from local minority-owned farms and distributes it to local corner stores that primarily serve low-income consumers. And in 2011, it received a grant through the USDA's Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, which was authorized in the 2008 Farm Bill to support sales of fresh produce and other so-called specialty crops, such as nursery crops and nuts and so on. So all U.S. states and territories actually have funds under this grant program, and you can apply through your state agriculture department. Mandela Marketplace is one of the few programs that targets healthy corner stores that has received this grant, but hopefully we'll see others in the future.
So one of the other huge infrastructure needs for corner stores is energy efficiency, and this is another thing that I love looking at in small stores is the state of their energy and refrigeration system. I'm sure you all see this every day in your work as well. You can see some really amazing mid-century refrigeration equipment that is literally draining resources out of the store every single day. We know that energy costs are really the second highest cost for store owners after labor, and it's a place where there's a pretty steep barrier to making those improvements. Refrigeration systems can be very, very expensive for small stores, but without energy efficiency, it can be very difficult for store owners ultimately to become profitable when they're just hemorrhaging those energy costs on a day-to-day basis. So that's something that's very important to look at in your small stores. And if that's an issue, there are a number of different places to look for resources. Your local utility may offer energy efficiency incentives. There may be programs at the state level that you can look at. And then at the federal level, for those of you working in non-urban areas, the Rural Energy for America program is designed for exactly this purpose. This is an image of a couple, Steve and Diane Hammer in Nebraska, who have a very small grocery store in a rural community that received a $65,000 grant to reinvest in their grocery store in an environmentally sustainable and cost-effective manner. And they were actually able to install a renewable geothermal heat pump system to save them money. So their whole store is now heated and cooled by geothermal energy. Obviously, that's an opportunity that may not exist. You may not have access to geothermal energy in all in all locations, but Rural Energy for America is designed for exactly this purpose, to help these very small businesses make the necessary upgrades and ultimately invest in environmental sustainability as well.
Finally, if you have a project idea to support healthy corner stores that doesn't seem to fit within the existing grant programs that you've seen so far, you may be happy to know that there are sources of funding that are appropriate for more novel or innovative business ideas. Some of the sources that we discussed are pretty flexible, and here's another one that can be used to support new enterprise opportunities and business models in communities that are currently underserved by healthy food retail. The HUFED, the Healthy Urban Food Enterprise Development Center, was created in the 2008 Farm Bill, and it has funded a range of really interesting projects around the country in both urban and rural areas. One grantee is the Dixon Cooperative Market of Rio Arriba County, New Mexico, which is the only grocery store serving its community of Dixon, which has a population of about 1,500 people, and several other small and unincorporated villages in the Embudo Valley. It has been in operation for over 5 years, and together with the library next door, has really become the cultural and economic heart of its community. Dixon Cooperative Market was awarded a 3-year Large Enterprise Award from HUFED to ramp up its capacity to sell healthy foods through capital and infrastructure improvements, and it will serve as a conduit for local growers to market their products to local consumers. So this was just a very, very brief snapshot of kind of a range of different types of funding sources that could meet the diverse needs of what's happening in your community. So before we transition to hearing from one of our guest speakers who will share his own experiences with searching for and acquiring funding, we wanted to do a quick poll to hear more about the context in your community. So on the next slide, we will ask you to select the response that most resonates with what's happening for you. Our poll question for you is, in your experience, what types of support do corner store owners need most? So go ahead and pick the response that fits with your experience. The possible choices are overall neighborhood revitalization efforts, so that could be things like streetscape improvements, that could be lighting, planners, street signage, pedestrian safety, and so on and so forth. Store improvements, which could include facade improvements, layout and equipment upgrades, or energy efficiency measures. Access to distributors of healthy foods. Community outreach, which could be marketing and promotion or educational efforts, technical assistance to store owners, and finally other. And if you have other types of needs in your community that you wanted to share, please feel free to type those into the chat box. And we'll give you just a few more seconds to respond. Okay, great. It looks like we have a majority of people responding. Whoops. So there we go. Wow. It looks like the response that was most popular was access to distributors for healthy food sources. But it looks like we had people who also see other important needs in their community, such as improvements to the store layout and overall neighborhood revitalization. Let's see what some of the others were. Capital to purchase land and sites. Someone else responded that they need assurance that their changes will be profitable. That is, that community members will be responsive to the changes and that are actually demanding healthier food options in their community. So thank you for sharing your experiences. This is really great context, and I'm hoping that we'll hear from some of our speakers about how they've been able to use funding to address some of these issues. So we're going to be hearing from Anthony Taylor. We're so excited to have him sharing his experiences from Sonoma County. Anthony Taylor has more than 15 years of experience in developing and implementing prevention and health promotion programs for nonprofits and local health departments in California. As the Chronic Disease Prevention Program Manager for the Sonoma County Department of Health Services, he manages operations for multiple obesity prevention programs, including the Healthy Food Outlet Project, which he'll be speaking about today. So the programs that he works on utilize environmental, systems, and policy change approaches to chronic disease prevention. He also serves as a co-chair for the California Convergence, where community leaders and partners seek to advance policy and environmental changes to create health equity in communities throughout the state through improved food and physical activity environments. Anthony Taylor, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And just to clarify for everyone on the phone, you prefer to go by your last name, Taylor, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I know that often that when we interact with you, we sometimes slip up as well. So Taylor, my first question for you is, could you briefly describe what your Healthy Corner Store program is and kind of the history of it and why you decided that this, or why the health department decided to get involved in this work?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off with a little bit about the history. And in about 2007, one of our local coalitions was approached by Northern California Kaiser Permanente and asked to submit a proposal for their Healthy Eating Active Living program, which is, I think most people know, is like the HEAL project or HEAL Zone project. And that's kind of where this whole kind of effort began. It was identified as an issue that healthier options was needed in the local markets in low-income neighborhoods that we were going to be working in, or we proposed working in. And so it was identified as a need and included in the community action plan. And that's kind of where it all started. And from there, as we started to implement the program, it kind of aligned with the Network for Healthy Californians CX3 community or food environment assessment that was conducted in our county in, I think, 2008 as well. So it was a great opportunity to kind of marry the two and start off with the assessment to really get a sense of what was going on in the neighborhoods, and then from there begin to build a program based on that. So the program itself, however, was a bit tough to get off the ground. It took us about a year to a year and a half, and that was mainly because there wasn't a lot going on out when we started doing research of what was going on in other communities and what had already been accomplished. Everything was still really new around food outlet work, and so we basically had to design something from the ground up. But what we landed on was really to kind of build it around the network's CX3 food environment assessment, specifically the assessment that was conducted with actual food outlets, which includes small markets, grocery stores, and convenience stores, et cetera. The main goal of our program was about sustainability. From the very beginning, we wanted to design a program that if the funding ended, these businesses would be able to sustain their changes. So we really wanted to design something that the business owners saw as value, that it was going to help them to make profits, it was going to help bring customers in, and all this is going to happen around that increasing access and availability to healthy foods in their stores. So when we go into a store and we begin to work with them, it really kind of takes place over 4 stages or 4. And the first one is really about that initial engagement and assessment. It's about engaging the business owners to begin to build their trust, really have them sign on to an agreement that they're going to participate in the program, that they're outlining what they'll get, what we'll provide. And then we conduct assessments, which includes the food environment assessments of what's in their store and the safety and walkability around their store. We conduct a manager's interview. And more recently, we're beginning to add a customer intercept interview, which really looks at kind of at the beginning of the program what the customers are purchasing, and at the end how their purchases have changed as a result of the program. So in stage 2, it's really about implementation related to improving their market quality score. So once they've finished their food environment assessment, they get an actual scorecard that tells them how they're doing. And this was developed by the network, and we just kind of it was already kind of a pre-made or pre-designed effort, and we thought it was a great way to kind of show them these are areas you're doing well in, and these are areas that could use some improvement. And so from there, we used that scorecard to provide them with the toolkit which we developed, again based around the different areas of the scorecard, and we provide them with a variety of different resources, including connection to energy efficiency upgrades when redevelopment was still in existence, the redevelopment agencies and the different opportunities or funding opportunities available there, and also a list of local distributors that are available to deliver produce in the community. We also provided nutrition education marketing materials through our partnership with the regional network folks, the retail specialists, and various incentives. And those have varied as the program is actually developed. It was started with the HEAL project as just mini grants, about $500, and they could use it for anything that either improved their refrigeration, either to purchase or improve refrigeration, or to purchase sign holders or even displays to promote healthier items. And the incentives have changed based on their various funding sources, which I can talk about in a second as well. And then we do regular store visits. We have a business liaison that meets with the store owners on a regular basis and checks in with them to see how they're doing on changes and their challenges and their technical assistance needs. So in the third stage, it's really about follow-up, and that's after a year of working with them. We do another assessment, food environment assessment, manager interview, and again, we're now starting customer intercept interviews. And that really begins to show them how they've changed, either improved their score or maybe their score hasn't improved, which has sometimes been the case. And then from that point forward, it's really maintenance. We assess our stores every year to continue to provide them with some level of technical assistance, but it just depends on the funding and also what kind of volunteers we have in the community in terms of residents who live in those areas who really want to have a passion for improving the food environment for the community in which they live. So that's a really kind of rough overview of the program.
Great, thank you, Taylor. And we have some images in the background from some of the store improvements that diverse stores have participated in, and it just it sounds like a really comprehensive program. It's been very great to hear about all the array of impressive activities that you've been able to undertake, all the way from assessment through creating incentives for the store owners, and then really ensuring that follow-up afterwards to make sure that the changes are sustainable. So along those lines, could you describe kind of what some of the resources and specific funding sources you've used to support your Healthy Corner Store? You've mentioned redevelopment agencies and the HEAL initiative. Could you describe some of the others?
Yeah. So besides the HEAL, which kind of helped us to pilot the project and helped us to develop our toolkit and whatnot, the CX3 food environment assessment work has helped us to kind of really assess not only what's happening in the stores, but also in the community around the stores to really determine where those needs are. So we've used those two. We've also applied for a couple of years ago a USDA Rural Business Enterprise Grant, which I think was mentioned a little while ago on the call, and that allowed us to work in kind of the more rural parts of our community. And it's interesting in developing that grant proposal because it really comes from a place of job creation. And we approached it as job creation from improving the food environment and getting more customers to come into the store. But there were definitely limitations that did not exist, say, with the HEAL grant, because there was a little bit more flexibility with how the funding could be used. We're also right now about to embark on another kind of leg of our program by bringing on stores through the USDA SNAP-Ed grant, because there's some food environment work that needs to be conducted, and if the residents identify food outlets as an area that needs to be worked on, then we can implement our program in various communities in Sonoma County as well through that program. The final one is which we're waiting to hear back for, which will take a few months. We also applied for a Robert Wood Johnson Healthy Eating Research Grant, which will allow us to kind of take that next step in showing the effectiveness in our program. Hopefully, that's what we're hoping, that we know through the work we've done for the past few years that stores do see an increase or an improvement in changes in the store through the implementation of this program. And so the next question is are those changes in store translating to improved or changes in customer purchasing habits? And so should we be funded, we'll be able to actually conduct a research effort around determining whether that is the case. So.
Great. And we should mention that some of the resources that you've created are available for people by request. Is that correct, Taylor?
Yeah. We have our draft, or 2010 draft of our toolkits available for anybody who wants it. Also, all of our evaluation tools. I think the CX3 evaluation tools are actually available on the network's website, but our managers' interviews and customer intercept interviews, and there's a variety of other kind of resources and whatnot that we provide food outlets. We're happy to share those with anybody who'd like to see that.
Great. So maybe after the call we'll provide a link to your contact information so that people who are interested in some of the evaluation components you discussed can access those. So it sounds like you've had a range of different types of funding with different goals in mind. So in your experience, what types of incentives are most effective at different stages of healthy corner store work? For instance, during the startup phase where you're doing a lot of the assessment and store outreach versus the implementation phases later on where you're actually getting to store changes.
Mm-hmm. Well, the startup phase during that kind of that evaluation component and assessment, it's interesting. There's a tangible incentives, which is really providing, during the manager's interviews, we provide them like a gift card to maybe a local business as a thank you for actually participating in the manager's interview, because they're very busy, individuals are very busy, and it's always nice to have a little incentive. But there's also non-tangible incentives. So for example, we from early on, we agreed that none of their information would be shared, like none of the data that we collect from them through the assessments would be shared with the public, like with their name attached to it. It's protecting their information because it's a very competitive atmosphere out there. And that helps people to kind of build that trust with us. So there's like those non-tangible and tangible items. But in terms of implementation, we found that obviously money always helps. And that's funds through mini grants to help them pay for equipment repairs or purchasing equipment or purchasing displays. But we've also provided as like mini thank yous, little smaller displays like with sign holders and whatnot that they can actually utilize. Actually, the image you have up right now is a perfect example. That sign holder on the left, while the Network for Healthy California provided the actual signage, the Harvest of the Month, we provided that sign holder as an incentive, as a thank you for participating. And it's sturdy, can be used for hopefully a very long time without the possibility of breaking. And so those kind of things can really help out and can be of great value. And then, in addition to that, we are also looking at other ways to provide them with additional signage. Like we're starting a healthy checkout project. We're testing out a healthy checkout program called the Smart Snack Zone. And one of the things we found out by talking to the stores is they really want, if we provide them with the displays to promote those healthy snacks, then they're more likely to place it at the front register. Whereas if you don't provide them with that display, the chances of them actually setting it up are pretty slim. So we're looking into how we might be able to do that. And the final one, I guess, would be the resources. It was pretty apparent very quickly, and even sometimes not so quickly, that stores don't really know about the resources that are available to them in the community, and a lot of that's because they're very busy. There's only a couple people working at the store, usually the owner and maybe one or two employees. And so providing them with that connection to existing resources so that way they don't have to do the work is an incentive for the actual businesses. And an example of that was our food distribution, our produce distribution. We went out last year and identified 5 local produce distributors, provided our food outlets participating in our program with a list of who those are, when they deliver, and whether they speak Spanish or not. And we had 2 of our stores actually change their distributors, and in the process were able to lower their prices for produce because of it, which was interesting because most things we hear is that that's not the case, that local distributors are more expensive. But we found that that's actually not true all the time. So providing them with information that they may not have can be very helpful.
That's great, and it sounds like it's of particular interest to many people on the call based on the poll results. And it sounds like the incentives have just been really crucial in kind of building these longer-term working relationships with the store owners. So kind of turning our attention to the actual funding sources, because we probably have many people who are looking for funding and kind of want your tips on how to do that successfully. How have you pitched your work to different funders who perhaps have different goals, such as economic development or rural business development or job creation? Have you found that different types of messaging have been most effective for these different funders?
Yeah, we have. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's really important that we found that when how can I say it? We have to be able to kind of spin the program a bit in order to kind of make it fit what the funders want. I think in many cases it can. You may not be able to do everything 100%, but something is sometimes better than nothing. So an example of that is, well, I'll provide an example in just a second, but we have in the past, for example, when we started off with Kaiser, they wanted a community action plan. So getting input from the residents and saying this is what our residents have identified through just various meetings we've had with them or through projects like Photo Voice. It's really been this is really community driven, and it's really what they want to see change. And so it was included in our action plan. With the Rural Business Enterprise Grant, it was job creation, which I have to say was a bit challenging because to show job creation, to show that the jobs that were created were a result of our program, it can be a little bit difficult to do that. But there are ways with our evaluators that we worked with to kind of help to capture, hopefully make some sort of connection. But we know that if we improve the food environment within a store and we bring the customers in, then that naturally should result in increased profits, which should naturally result in the need for more employees to be working. And so we are able to spin it that way and really kind of focus our efforts on that. It helped us to secure that grant. With the network, it was about just generally, in Network Healthy California, it was about improving the food environment. And one of the things that I think has helped with our project and helps us to continue to get funding is that we had a pilot phase. And that pilot phase did show increases in the total market scores that we had through the CX3 food environment assessment, which means that stores were making changes in their store. And that really showed that there was some success at actually creating changes and improving the food environment in these neighborhoods. And then finally, obviously, the Robert Wood Johnson one is really about, well, we've shown that it actually improves in-store changes. Now let's see if we can actually show that it changes customer buying patterns for the better. So it's just trying to find those creative ways to kind of move not only the program, not only find creative ways to secure the funding, but also you can actually use this new sources of funding to actually move your program to the next level, which we're now in the process right now of updating our entire program, adding on, for example, alcohol and tobacco scans, and starting to include that in the overall score, possibly, of the store quality score, and also looking at different ways that we can promote healthier beverage consumption, either by decreasing the volume of beverages sold, by selling smaller cans, or just moving sugar-sweetened beverages to different parts of the store. So we're trying to explore new options of how we can continue to create a healthier food environment in these small markets.
Great. It's your program is, I think we can all agree, is really inspiring, and it sounds like kind of the evaluation piece has been really critical to not only finding new sources of funding, but also managing those relationships with your existing funders. And it's great to hear that you're continuing to innovate and thinking about different ways of changing your program and adding on to it. So we're going to actually jump ahead to some more content and then hear from our other guest speaker, but we will be hearing again from Taylor at the end of the session. So if there are any additional questions for him, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We've seen a few come in already. So thank you so much, Taylor, for sharing your experiences.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I wanted to pick up on some of the themes that Lisa and Taylor were discussing and try to translate this into some recommendations for what this means for your work. I'd like to offer some concrete tips for developing a funding plan for your Healthy Corner Store project at whatever phase you are in. I'm going to cover 3 big ideas for how you could approach your funding portfolio. And the first suggestion is that it's really critical to continually revisit your funding plan, because different funding types and activities will be more appropriate and will make sense at different stages of the project. And I think Taylor gave a really great example of how that worked in Sonoma. What I see when I work with Healthy Corner Store projects around the country is that many people come to this work with funding for community engagement or for nutrition education. And that's so important and a really critical role for public health to play. But as I know you all know, or you wouldn't be on this call, that's not enough. There are many, many other funding activities that are critical for supporting small stores, particularly if you're looking at that big picture of sustainability. And we talked at the beginning of today's webinar about some of these activities. So I would really encourage you to push the envelope for funding by bringing new partners into the work. You do not have to become experts in energy efficiency or store layout and equipment, but you may be able to prepare an application to bring in someone with that expertise. So I think what's really important is that you have in your mind the scope of activities that can be funded and the capacity to prepare applications for funding. Doesn't necessarily mean that you will yourself be doing all of this work. It's also really important to consider, in addition to the types of activities for which you want to seek funding, you also need to consider what kind of funding makes the most sense for your project. Obviously, grants are incredibly attractive for a lot of reasons. I mean, most of us who work in local government or for community-based organizations are really familiar with grants as a source of funding for our work. Loans and tax incentives might be less familiar tools. So I'd really encourage you to, again, bring in partners and begin to develop your own capacity to understand where loans may be appropriate and how to prepare the store owners with whom you're working to ultimately put together a successful proposal for funding. And we'll come back to this idea in just a moment. So once you have an idea about the type of funding you seek, how do you develop your pitch to ensure that the resources flow towards your project? Obviously, as Taylor articulated very clearly, you really need to consider the funder's priority in preparing your application. So for example, if you're working with your local economic development department, you may find that they have a bias towards activities like business attraction. They may be more interested in bringing in a full-service grocery store than investments in entrepreneurial development. Or they may be more interested in making investments in large employers as opposed to developing programs for to support microenterprise. Or I think we see this in all of our communities, there may be investments being made in large-scale infrastructure as opposed to repurposing and revitalizing the existing resources of communities. So when you do Healthy Corner Store work, you may find that you're in a kind of an awkward position where you don't have a good alignment between your local funders' priorities or the federal funding priorities that are available. But I think this is a really interesting creative challenge. How can you highlight the parts of your projects that fit? How can you figure out how to really creatively leverage different aspects? And so it might not be that, that health is the most persuasive case for funders. I think this is a point that we've made before. But you may find that your proposal really falls outside of the normal bounds of what a funder expects. So you play to that. Now, elected officials might be worried about jobs. Economic development agencies are likely to be worried about bringing revenue into the community. So one way to do that is to really leverage some very powerful data to build your case. This is an example from South LA, which was trying to attract more healthy food retail. And they were able to aggregate data for spending power for food at home, demonstrating that it far exceeded the demand in some nearby wealthier communities. So building your case is one component. Another strategy is actually to change the conversation entirely. I think it's really important to keep in mind that your local economic development agency ultimately reports to your elected officials, whether that's your city council or your board of supervisors. So it may be worth your time to set up some meetings with your city council or your board of supervisors to educate them about the multiple impacts of your project, not just on the local economy, but on health, and build their buy-in. I think getting a champion in a local elected official can be very, very powerful ultimately in changing how economic development decisions, how spending priorities for local economic development decisions are made. I had a direct experience with this prior to joining Change Lab Solutions. I was part of an advocacy effort in Pennsylvania to create more funding sources for healthy food retail. That ultimately resulted in the creation of a special funding program called the Fresh Food Financing Initiative. But before the Fresh Food Financing Initiative was created, we actually were able to convince the State Economic Development Agency to change the funding guidelines for one of the state economic development programs to include healthy food retail. So it had previously been a loan program for agricultural activities, and through meetings with elected officials, we were able to convince the governor to change the funding guidelines to include healthy food retail. So thinking outside of the box and really building your advocacy muscles is a critical component, the sort of political side of bringing funding to your projects. Another very important consideration as you build your funding strategy is how you keep the retailers themselves engaged. We've heard from Taylor very clearly that his goal is to make sure that the projects are sustainable after he's gone. And I have a few thoughts and best practices to share with you. One is to make sure that you really develop clear expectations. And I sometimes see that when people approach store owners, they're concerned about expecting too much of store owners, and they want to provide a lot of services and provide a lot of resources to store owners. And I think that makes sense and is really appropriate. But it's also, I think, really important to establish upfront clear expectations for what the store owners themselves will contribute to the project. And one way to do that is through a memorandum of understanding, an MOU or a contract that articulates what the store owner is receiving and what he or she is expected to do in exchange for those resources. That may not be appropriate for all stages of the project. That may be something, a stage 2 or 3 as you do the work. But I think you should approach your planning with the expectation that the store owners themselves will be making investments of their time and their money in this process over the long term. It's also critical, I think, to really reward improvement by pairing grants and loans, sort of a carrot and a stick approach. And to ramp up incentives based on performance. So perhaps starting quite small with the incentives, maybe $50, $500, and then as the store owner really begins to get a sense of how this is working, the incentives can become larger, but that you don't go in with an incentive that exceeds what the store owner is actually being asked to do. And then finally, to really think creatively about in-kind resources. Sometimes when I'm in stores, I'm pleasantly surprised by the reflections from the store owners that some of the most valuable assistance they've received has simply been coverage in the local media, which may be something that's pretty easy for you to secure for the store owner, but would be very difficult for them to make happen for themselves. So incentives need not be financial. I really be creative about that. And then, of course, again, this is a bit of a broken record, but to make sure that you adjust as needed as your work deepens, change up the incentives and recalibrate as you move along. So I'd like to hear from you. What are the messages as you've worked to pitch your projects to funders? What messages have you found to be the most compelling? I've shared a few of our thoughts. What has worked for you? So have you found that your funders respond to the current health crisis and chronic disease? Is the obesity epidemic what motivates your funders? Or are you finding funders that want to support small business owners? Have any of you found an economic argument to be compelling, that you're building the local tax base or jobs? I know many of you work on leadership and youth development. I'm curious to hear if that's been a good message for funders. Neighborhood safety or community building or others. It's there are other messages that you've used, please type that response in the chat box so others can hear from you. And I'll give you just a few more moments to respond. Okay, so let's see. It does look like most of you are finding resonance in the message around the current health crisis. That's very, very interesting. Someone said that what they're finding locally is that local agriculture has been the really beneficial message, which is really interesting. And then we see a tie for supporting small business owners and the economic argument. Very, very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now, and we're going to shift gears a little bit and hear a little bit more in depth about a specific resource that's available to those of you who are working in California. We're thrilled to be joined by Veronica Saldana, who is the California Freshworks Fund Business Development Manager. She's with a group called Emerging Markets, Inc., and her responsibilities are to manage the Freshworks Fund's statewide outreach activities and marketing and evaluating loan requests. So any of your retailers who may be applying will ultimately interface with her, so she's a really good person to get to know. Veronica, could you, for folks on the call who aren't familiar with the California Freshworks Fund, could you give a general introduction to Freshworks and describe its goals?
Sure, of course. So the California Freshworks Fund was launched over a year ago. It's a private loan fund capitalized at about $260 million. The fund was created to finance new and upgrade grocery stores, plus other forms of healthy food retail and distribution in the state of California. Our primary focus are low to moderate income communities. And the fund was really created as a market-oriented response to the limited availability of healthy food in many California's communities, also known as food deserts. And so given the fact that this was the primary response of the fund, actually the fund's lead investor and primary proponent is the California Endowment, which seeded the fund with over $40 million. So the fund's design and ongoing support are the product of a pretty broad coalition of industry, nonprofit, government partners that all came together on the issue of food access. And which today we have now raised over $260 million. The fund is modeled after the Pennsylvania Fresh Food Financing Initiative and was developed to align with the National Healthy Food Financing Initiative called by President Barack Obama. Our fund is administered by NCB Capital Impact. They're a nonprofit community development financial institution. And the outreach, marketing, and pipeline development services are provided by Emerging Markets.
Thank you. That's really that's a great overview. Could you give an overview of the types of projects that the Freshworks Fund can support?
Sure, of course. So our fund has three primary goals, as I mentioned. Our first is to provide access to healthy food. Our second is to provide or spur economic development, hoping to create jobs in our investments. And our third is to invest in companies or entrepreneurs who can demonstrate what food retail should look like to date. So we're really looking for projects that are innovative, perhaps those projects that might have some difficulty getting some traditional bank financing because they're so innovative. So a little bit about our programs. We have a couple of products that we can cover. Our primary lending program is a loan fund. They are loans anywhere from $250,000 to $8.5 million to finance projects that meet our goals and mission. We have a couple of loan products. We're able to finance acquisition, so store owners who are interested in purchasing a new property, a new building. We can also finance the construction piece, in addition to tenant improvements. We can also finance equipment, new equipment or used equipment. And we also can provide capital for inventory or just working capital needs. In addition to the loan program, we also have a grant program. We are able to provide grants from $5,000 to $50,000. They're basically companion grants for projects that demonstrate need. Our grants related to our companion, the companion grants, those grants are able to be used for pre-development. So store owners who are borrowing money, for example, to purchase a new property or a new business, they can apply for a grant to cover any of the early costs, pre-development needs such as appraisals, market studies, any other reports needed to look at the viability of the project. We're also able to offer workforce development and local hiring grants. Those grants are intended for employee training programs, perhaps a local hiring fair, any type of local activity for hiring of the store. And lastly, we have an innovation grant. Again, we're looking for projects that have high potential to increase food access. And so we're able to provide grants for that, for folks who are working on innovative projects but just need some of that early money to get the project moving forward.
And could you tell us a little bit about how FreshWorks is working with corner store conversions?
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to talk about this because it's actually one of our new programs under the FreshWorks banner. We just launched a corner store conversion program out of the response of many inquiries coming to us from nonprofit organizations, public agencies, even private small firms wanting microloans to work on these corner store conversion programs. Unfortunately, our fund, when it was developed over a year and a half ago, was not set up to be a microloan fund. However, our response to that was to create a corner store conversion program where we would seek intermediaries. We're looking for qualified intermediaries such as nonprofit partners, public agencies, community development financial institutions who can borrow capital and then re-lend the capital in a microloan or re-grant the capital for the goal of a corner store conversion program. And so a little bit about this particular program. It's very new. We are committed to making capital investments of $100,000 to qualified intermediaries. The investments, they have a 3-year term. Our interest rate for that investment is 3.25%. And we would defer all payments, including interest, to the end of the term. And we request that the intermediary convert a minimum of 2 to 3 stores. Assuming that the intermediary is successful converting those stores, at the end of the term, we will then forgive $25,000 of the loan for good performance.
That's great. I really look forward to seeing the sorts of projects that come out of that program. Veronica, many of the participants on today's webinar are from public health departments or community-based organizations. What are the top 3 things from your perspective that they need to know about fresh food financing in order to be effective partners with stores in their communities and help build a pipeline of successful projects?
Sure. So I think the top thing would be, Hannah, I think you mentioned this, and we're very right on, was to really understand the store owner and really understand how to engage the store owner. We feel that it's critical to understand the store owner's goals and what they intend to get out of the program. We feel that identifying a store owner who has the capacity to, in our case, take on debt or a grant is crucial. Additionally, we feel that it's important to have a good team in place, partners with the capacity to provide, whether it be procurement strategies, product placement strategies, or provide that wraparound technical assistance so that the conversion is successful.
That's very helpful. I heard you say that the California FreshWorks Fund is not providing microloans. Do you have any suggestions for where Healthy Corner Store programs look for those sorts of funds?
Sure. So we have a couple of partners who we're engaging with who do provide some microfinancing, one of them being Feed the Hunger Foundation. They're based in the Central Valley, but they work all over the state and actually nationally and internationally. They're a great group. Most of their micro loans are they're smaller loans. I believe they're up to $15,000, and they're working on a couple of programs now in the Central Valley supporting corner store conversion programs. In addition to them, we're familiar with Opportunity Fund. They're a statewide CDFI with offices in the Bay Area, and they're a pretty well-known micro lender. And additionally, I'd like to suggest once our program gets ramped up for folks to work with the intermediaries that we finance.
That's great. That's really helpful. I was curious, I mentioned that many Healthy Corner Store projects are versed in grant funding. For those that are looking to build the capacity of the store owners to take on debt financing, do you have any recommendations for resources or general approaches for how to equip these store owners to ultimately be able to take on debt financing and shift from a grant model?
Yeah, I would really go back to making sure, understanding the owner's financial ability to take on debt. So really looking at the financial viability of the project and the ability of the business owner to successfully take on debt and structure a program in a way that it won't hinder their business in any way, and really helping them see the value of making the investment for a long-term return for their business.
That's great. That's helpful. That's a helpful perspective. I think it really is a long-term process that we're talking about here, about building the capacity of these store owners. So for those of you who are on the call, we're going to transition to an open Q&A session with both Veronica and Taylor, and we've been having questions come in the chat box. So please, if you have additional questions, we can still take a few more. The chat box, again, is on the lower left-hand side of your screen, and I'm going to hand the baton back to Lisa to facilitate this portion of the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Hannah and Veronica, for that really great introduction into the FreshWorks Fund, and we're really looking forward to seeing the projects coming through that pipeline. So my first question is for both of you. So Taylor, from your perspective running a program, and Veronica, your perspective in the funder seat, what do you believe are some of the most challenging aspects of Healthy Corner Store programs to find funding for? Taylor, would you like to answer first?
Sure. So the question again is the most challenging aspects to find funding for. And I would say it's the equipment or signage, any kind of tangible items that you can use as incentives are really, I found it, are pretty difficult to get funded. A lot of what has been easy is funding for technical assistance and kind of the background work, as well as the direct face-to-face interactions with the store owners. But finding funding, like incentive fundings, is a bit challenging to do. But I think that there are various opportunities if we can leverage funding. So if you have a secured funding source to do like 2 or 3 years of work or something to that effect, and then search out local funding opportunities that are in smaller amounts to kind of fill those gaps is what we're attempting to do right now and continuing to look for.
Great. Veronica, does this kind of map out with your experience?
Absolutely. I think Taylor hit it right on the dot there, that those are definitely the challenges in terms of finding the funding to cover the uses such as equipment and facade improvements. We see a lot of that now throughout the state, now that some of the funding is more limited with the issue of the redevelopment agencies being gone. Some of the larger cities had implemented a corner store conversion program with those funds, and now that those are scarce and maybe non-existent, I think that we see a lot of need in that area.
And can I also...
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah. So just also, one of the challenges in terms of finding funding is that there's nothing really, well, there's limited data out there that shows the efficacy of these types of programs at actually increasing the profits of the stores or actually creating changes in customer buying patterns. And I think that's a challenge for those of us who are trying to seek out funding. So I think as people get their programs up and running, any kind of evaluation that can be done, and that can be somehow either anecdotally or professionally published that can show that these changes are actually working, I think is going to be very valuable for everybody else as they continue to seek out funding to help move these efforts forward.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful to hear about all of these great anecdotes of successful projects, and it sounds like there's a lot of room for those of you who are working in this field to make a great contribution to the field through evaluation and research. So kind of along the lines of thinking about being creative with scarce resources, healthy corner store work, as you've alluded to, Taylor, is pretty recent. And it's really starting to flourish at a time when local government and foundation budgets are shrinking. So do either of you have recommendations for how to be creative with existing resources and supporting this work if local funding is scarce?
Yes. I would say that I'm just kind of running through my mind as kind of the different approaches that we've taken. One thing that pops into my head is that sometimes just building relationships with your local public works or community development departments or city councils or board of supervisors can really be beneficial in the long run because you're building that trust and that relationship that they can rely on you. And what I mean by that is that, we had a recently our major city in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, went through a process of updating their general plan language and zoning ordinance language for grocery stores. It was a business development approach, but they really wanted to incorporate healthy food. And because they had actually worked with us on a previous project, they actually approached me and asked me if I could help them with some research. And I spent some time doing that. And what ended up happening was the general plan language got updated, and they're still doing some modifications to it, but it's allowing for the easier placement of grocery stores in various communities throughout the city, especially in the one food desert that the USDA has identified in the entire county, which is in Santa Rosa. So, and a lot of their focus is on addressing that food desert issue in that area. And that alone can actually, just in the process of doing that, they've actually improved general plan language, improved zoning language to allow for easier placement of healthy food, requiring that these stores carry fresh produce, fresh meat, kind of things like that, and in the process really are starting to address those other issues, those other food access issues. And in turn, it sets a good position for the relationship to continue to grow, so that way if we come to them later and say, hey, there is this other opportunity, they'd be more willing to actually be involved in that conversation and to see what options are available and are possible.
Thank you. That's a wonderful example, and we've been talking a lot about the relationship with store owners, but as you've mentioned, this relationship with your local government agencies is critical, and it sounds like you've really been able to capitalize upon opportunities as they arise. Veronica, was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I would just also add the relationship with community stakeholders to leverage those relationships as well. We're working with a partner now who has been awarded one of these corner store loans, and in addition to having government partners and partners with nonprofit communities and community organizations, they're also partnering with the residents and local nonprofits who are working more on social justice issues. And so what they're doing is holding focus groups around the corner store conversion and how to empower the community, but also educate the youth to work with the business owner to support and promote what is going on there.
Absolutely. That is a great message. So we have some specific questions for you, Veronica, about the fund. Okay. There are audience members who want to know a little bit about how much funding has already been loaned out to businesses, how really people get plugged into the fund and learn more about how to get started with applying, and then whether or not you also provide wraparound services such as financial counselors who can provide some technical assistance and support to small store owners.
Sure. So today we have funded and have committed about $30 million from our fund. That money is primarily out of the syndicated loan fund, so the large loan fund that I talked about, the $250,000 up to $8.5 million. In terms of the corner store work, since it's fairly new and we're in the process of promoting the program and marketing the program, we have only made 2 awards for that to date, and so we're looking forward to ramping up on our outreach so that we get the word out on that. And as far as what was the other question? Do we provide the wraparound services?
Correct.
Unfortunately, we do not. Our funding is limited to the actual nuts and bolts of the corner store conversions. We ask that the intermediaries provide in their application some type of leverage for that component. So whether it be they partner up with an organization that can provide those services, but at this time we do not provide grants for that.
Great. So it sounds like that you're really, with this funding, trying to encourage local partnerships among diverse stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely.
So kind of along those lines, one further question for you. From the funder perspective, what types of characteristics might you look for in a project application that will help you gauge whether or not a project kind of has what it needs to succeed in the long run? For instance, for people who are working with multiple store owners and want to seek funding to work with just a couple in depth, what types of business practices or metrics or just kind of indicators about those businesses do you look for?
Great question. So we really look at, number one, the business owner. We want to understand their history with running the store. We want to understand their track record. We're looking for non-startups, so business owners who know the community, who have been in the community. And so for us, it's important to understand who is who is the owner and what type of business do they run. We also want to focus on the team that is moving the program forward. So we want to understand the team's core capacity. Do they understand capital? What is their ability to manage a project, to really implement the project management aspect for the project, to not just work with the store owner, but to bring other partners together so that they can provide all of the components necessary to make the program successful, such as the design piece of the conversion, the food, the store layout piece of the conversion, the ability to help the store owner understand their options and how this will be a long-term successful, sustainable program. So we really look at the entire thing. And then we also want to understand what is the need of the community. Since our mission is to really invest in low to moderate income communities where access is an issue, we want to understand who is the community, what is going on there, how will this conversion make an impact.
That's really great. And we've been talking about so many different types of funding sources, and again, that messaging piece. And some funding has kind of more specific or limited kind of goals. And it sounds like with the fund, you really are looking for innovative projects.
Absolutely.
So a couple of questions for Taylor. We had some participants wondering about kind of the types of food that you're recommending that store owners start stocking. So as we know, there are different definitions of healthy foods. So is there some way that you kind of ensure the cultural appropriateness of the foods that are being introduced? And in particular, are there any assessment tools that can help you kind of gauge what's needed and what's appropriate?
Yeah, well, for the first, say, couple of years we've been doing this project, we just basically invite the stores to either carry or improve the quality of their fresh produce that they have. So it's really left up to them in terms of what types of produce they'd like to carry, as an example. The other things, in terms of the kind of staple items that they carry, we really base that off of the WIC nutritional guidelines, the WIC guidelines of what a WIC vendor would carry, and that's because that's how the CX3 tool is designed. But it's not limited to that, obviously. This next year, we're going to be engaging stores and actually implementing a new component to the program, which is to actually interview customers to determine what their needs are and what they want the store to carry, and use that information to work with the stores to actually carry more items that could be culturally appropriate, for example. But a lot of what we do provide to the stores, like if the store has a large Latino clientele, for example, we work so closely with the network and a lot of the network qualifying stores that we do provide them with materials, point-of-purchase materials or educational materials that are specifically designed to reach and impact the Latino community. So we try to really align with who their customer base is as well. One of the things, though, I'd like to point out is this Smart Snack Zone that we're actually in the process of piloting. The nutritional standards for those snack items are based on the USDA 2010 dietary guidelines, or the most recent dietary guidelines for fat, sugar content, and whatnot. And they do have to meet those requirements in order for the product to be placed in the Smart Snack Zone. And so, but we are finding some difficulty with Latino stores because usually we go and identify the food that's in their store already and really highlight those. But with Latino markets, there's not a lot of healthier snack choices that are geared towards the Latino population for snack items, at least what we've seen so far. And so we still have a bit of research to do to really identify those products that are really going to be beneficial or going to sell to their customers.
Great. It sounds like you've really pieced together a range of different ways of assessing whether or not something is both nutritious but also appropriate and in demand in the community. So we had another question for you about kind of that store owner relationship and whether or not you've either worked with store owners who have been perhaps a little bit more difficult to work with, and whether or not that has kind of impacted your projects.
Yes, the answer is yes. We have, some store owners have just been exceptional to work with. We've had one of our pilot stores, they practically doubled their score, and they were I think the only score that was recognized for making healthy changes for a healthier community, which is kind of what our recognition program once they reach a certain threshold. And he was absolutely amazing in terms of the changes in the work that he'd done in the store. And actually, that's from his store right there, the picture you're seeing right in front of you. But there are other stores, like with the USDA grant we did, we worked with, I think, 2 small markets or 3 small markets and 2 convenience stores. And the convenience stores just were really difficult to work with. And we learned from that effort that our focus will really be on kind of the larger grocery stores, not supermarkets, and the small markets. But the convenience stores, they're just so entrenched in their products that they sell that getting them to shift to carry things like fresh produce or whatnot is incredibly challenging. So if we work with them in the future, we work with them kind of doing smaller projects inside their store, but those small projects wouldn't end up in seeing a very large increase in their score. So we had to kind of look at the low-hanging fruit, as it were, and really focus on them. But yes, we've had stores that have done exceptional changes and some that have actually, their scores have gotten worse in the time we've worked with them. But we've had incredible difficulty getting them to make changes.
Sorry to hear about the stores who actually scored lower. But it sounds like, we've been talking about store owner needs, and there's a wide range of needs out there. And so that definitely has to factor into program design. So we're just about out of time. There are some additional questions that we perhaps will not get to today, but we're happy to provide contact information if people want to follow up. And we'll also be posting resources and a recording of this webinar after the program. So before we close, we just wanted to highlight a few resources that we have available for people who want more information after the call. So at our website, changelabsolutions.org, we have several guides that are devoted to the topic of finding resources to support healthy food projects. Here are a couple of them. One, a fact sheet on really how to partner with economic development agencies and institutions. And then on the right, we have a toolkit on kind of how to structure incentives to support a range of public health projects, including but not limited to healthy food access. We also wanted to highlight a couple of other resources that are out there. We have on our website a guide called Green for Greens, which this webinar was named after, that actually outlines several of the resources that we described on this call and many others, and kind of talks about how to apply for them and provides examples of funded projects. On the left, there's a guide that was recently published by the Opportunity Finance Network, which has a compilation of over 70 different funding sources, specifically geared towards CDFIs, but it should be helpful for anyone who is interested in finding sources of funding to support this work. And for each of the sources of financing, it describes the eligibility criteria and gives examples of past projects. And finally, here are another few sources. The Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food project through the USDA is an online portal that has just a wealth of information about different types of projects that support the whole food system. And they recently updated their Food Compass map to provide searchable information about projects that have received funding through the USDA to support food access. Here is an example of a project in South LA that received funding for their youth development and Healthy Corner Store work. And then finally, we've also mentioned the Healthy Corner Store Network, of which we are a co-convener, and their website has an array of examples from communities who are actually engaged in this work and who are sharing their resources, such as toolkits, sample scripts for approaching store owners, and also some tips on finding funding to support this work. And just to reiterate, we are having another webinar in this series, New Carrots on the Block, on August 27th about rewarding success. So that webinar is going to be focused on really thinking about how incentives can enlist the support of local corner store owners through certification programs and publicity campaigns. And with that, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again to our speakers for sharing your wealth of expertise. We will be providing links to the resources that they've mentioned, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please feel free to contact us at the information provided here.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the conference call for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect.